This program is brought to you by the partners of A Rood Awakening International. Help others find truth. Support A Rood Awakening International today.
Russia has always posed a significant threat and even seems to be mentioned in the book of the Revelation. But how did we get here? Geopolitical author, speaker, and bioterrorism emergency preparedness planner Mark Fulmer shares the history of Russia as a lesson for where we may be going next. Because it's the end of the sixth day, the sun is set, and this is Shabbat Night Live. Well, Shabbat Shalom, Torah fans. It's Shabbat Night Live with Michael Rood. Are you a boomer? If you are, you may have done bomb drills as a kid in school, like getting under your desk to avoid a nuclear blast was going to do anything. Anyway, that nuclear threat has always seemed to come from Russia. And today we have the situation between Russia and Ukraine, China, Iran. It's a mess. But it goes back a lot farther than the Cold War. Mark Fulmer, who brought us our Wuhan series a few years ago, remember that one? He's back with a look at Russia from way back and how it plays into our future. But before we get into that, it's the first Shabbat of the 11th month on the astronomically and agriculturally corrected biblical Hebrew calendar. Now, let's get to talking what's going on with Angie Clark and Michael Rood. Welcome.
Good to be here, Scott.
Good
Shabbat
to have
shalom,
you.
Shabbat shalom.
5 Shabbats this month. How about that?
I love it.
Yes. So we're heading now into February. But now the world's a mess right now. And China we mentioned in that little monologue there. Where Mark is talking about Russia and how it all ties into what we're seeing in the book of the Revelation and things like that. And before the cameras came on, Michael, I asked you if you thought Russia was in the book of the Revelation. You said you're not quite sure about that one.
Yeah, but China is in the book of Isaiah. And the Chinese recognize it. It's Qin from Chinese.
Okay.
The Qin dynasty. And they are going to be part of the last revival. So the Chinese know that. And I was over in China several times with Paul Shea.
Yeah, they were.
And we have the book, the chronological Gospels in Chinese that's going to be sold over in Taiwan.
That's beautiful.
And, yeah.
Love it. Now, in Taiwan, because Taiwan is sort of this, as Paul Shea explained it to us in our Yom Teruah event, if folks saw that, he explained how Taiwan, as he put it, is the rudder of the ship, and the ship is China. Because China and the political system that it has can't quite have the influence we would like it to have, but Taiwan does. So Taiwan can steer the ship that is China.
Yes. There were 200 Chinese pastors who came down to Taiwan this year. So they know that's where they're free to speak.
Okay,
Wow.
so there's free speech. So it's kind of like a Western country, kind of?
It is really.
Okay.
We were there first.
Okay. So when you went to China to speak, you really went to Taiwan?
Well, I went to both.
Oh, you went to both?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Didn't realize that. Okay, very good. And Paul Shea is the man behind that with Kingdom for Jesus.
Yeah, he's the man.
Okay, and he works with us, and we love Paul, and he's very excited to bring the chronological Gospels from you, Michael, over there.
Yeah.
And I know that that was a real eye-opener. Can you imagine being Chinese going, wait, my people are mentioned in the Bible? How come nobody ever told me
Beautiful.
this?
Yeah.
You know?
Love it.
It's a great thing. It's like finding like your family name is in the Bible. It's a great thing.
Yeah.
So they're going to have the last end time revival. That's where China comes in.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
All right, very good. Well, tonight we're going to learn a little bit about Russia, so we're going to go to that. So, Angie, Michael, thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
And
Scott.
we're going to have Paul Shea. We could have him here anytime, but tonight we're going to have Mark Fulmer, geopolitical author, speaker, and bioterrorism emergency preparedness planner. Mark Fulmer shares the history of Russia as a lesson for where we may be going next. Now, here's Michael with the Kiddush.
There is a rabbinic tradition
even a takanot, a law which changed biblical law, that before one eats bread, one must wash their hand with a two-handled pot, a negelvesser, and say this prayer. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by your commandments, commanding us to wash the hands. Nowhere in the scripture is this ever commanded. In fact, the rabbis will plainly say that we are the ones that made it up, and when you are obeying us, you're obeying God. Well, Yeshua said, do not follow the takanot of the Pharisees. Do not follow their man-made rules and regulations. But every time there is bread, every time we can remember what Yeshua said, what he put in place. And we can say the prayer, Baruch atah Yehovah Eloheinu melech ha'olam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Blessed are you, Yehovah, our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. And Yeshua said, I am the bread brought forth from the earth. This represents my body, which is broken for you. As often as you do this, if it's every meal, if it's every Sabbath, you do it in remembrance of me, because by his stripes we were healed. And Yeshua took the cup, and he said, Baruch atah Yehovah, Eloheinu melech ha'olam, Borei pari hagafen. Blessed are you, Yehovah, our God, King of the universe, creator of the fruit of the vine. And Yeshua said, this represents the renewed covenant in my blood. The broken covenant in which we were offered to be priests and kings, Yeshua paid the price. He renewed the covenant with us and made us priests and kings. And so as often as we do this, we remember this, and we reign as priests and kings now, and will do so in the future with Yeshua for 1,000 years in our resurrected body, along with his resurrected body. And we do this in remembrance of him. Shalom.
Here in the United States, 1776 is a very important date for us. That's when we started here. And in Russia, it's a little bit before that, 988 to be exact. And we'd like to know a little bit more about Russia. What's exactly is going on there, and what are our chances of having World War III with this country? Well, someone who knows a lot more about that than I do is here on the stage to tell us about this. Please welcome Mark Fulmer. Mark, welcome.
All right, thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
A little bit about my background for your viewing audience.
Sure, yes, please.
I have an organization called Real Geopolitics. And so we have a team of investigative journalists that our motto is to look at geopolitical events, things that are happening in the world today, and actually try to look at and discern what is the big picture behind events, because we hear so many things in mainstream media. So I have a great team. I'd like to say I could take credit for all this myself, but I have such an awesome team. I've been blessed with Scott, former military intelligence, FBI. I've got journalists, I've got geopolitical experts around the world, even in Australia, that basically I connect with through Real Geopolitics to try to drill down what's happening. And my most recent work that was released this spring is the proxy war in Ukraine, what we're going to be discussing today and in these episode segments.
Now, you had first come to us, by the way, a couple of years ago to sort of reveal behind the veil what was happening with Wuhan and COVID, and that was really well received. So you kind of bring us that sort of dark matter of what's the things we're not seeing, which is wonderful.
I like that word, dark matter, because you begin looking at, and I worked for government for 20 years. I was in counterterrorism operations. My specialized area, I was a subject matter expert in biological weapons. And I worked with federal and local agencies, state, basically dealing with biosurveillance units. I ran some of the largest biosurveillance labs in North Texas. And our goal, our mission then was to actually look for bad guys that were going to use a Category A agent like Bacillus anthracis or smallpox to release it. And eventually what happened, things started going kind of deep state right before COVID. And I began noticing this lab in China called the Wuhan lab. And it was basically a level 4 lab, highest biosurveillance safety level that can be granted. Only 2 labs here in the United States are level 4. So I began asking some questions. I got into a lot of trouble, kept asking questions. Finally, it was time for me because a lot of my superiors, the directors, had really gone deep state. I didn't see the handwriting on the wall right away. And I was one of the earliest whistleblowers into the gain-of-function research with the Wuhan lab. And so began looking at really, that's how I started with that work right toward the end of COVID in 2019, 2020, that investigative research. And then it led into this, what we're doing now currently.
You know, I'm fascinated by this because, you know, everybody sees this on TV and it's like, well, I'm siding with this side, I'm siding with that side. It's not really about sides. There's something much more deep to this. And so that's why we wanted to have you on here today and to talk about this. And so without further ado, I just want to have you go on this because you have a ton of stuff that we're going to get into. We're going to do 3 episodes here, and then we also have a special love gift on the more spiritual nature of what you see with Russia. Yes. So please go ahead. Tell us where Russia comes from and where are we going with all this?
Absolutely. And Scott, when we look at Russia, because there's a lot of questions about what's going on with this war in Ukraine. And, you know, we are at a stage where we have to ask the tough questions about the assessment on our foreign policy. Are things working? Which we'll go ahead and analyze some of those issues. But to truly understand Russia, we have to look at the whole ball of wax in terms of what has shaped their cultural identity. It's come from their history, and what's driving them now. Because obviously, as you mentioned, 1,000 years of history in Russia, I mean, that has been so significant and shaping the identity. When you look at modern Russia now, in terms of the Russian Federation, in terms of Putin's leadership, why do they see themselves in the position now? Putin has this idea, we're going to talk about him and some of where he's going, what's going on inside his head. He's like I call in my book, he's the Russian matryoshka, the Russian nesting doll. He's this mysterious enigma. We try to understand him, and we peel back each layer from the larger doll to the very small one to understand what's going on. Well, one of the keys to do that is to look at the history of Russia, because he actually envisions himself as one who will resurrect the glorious Russian imperial past. And although the Soviet Union is long gone, Putin still longs for domination of Russia in much part of Eastern Europe. And we're going to talk about his vision of Eurasian conquest there. So moving into the history of Russia, you can see it's a very long segment of history, what's influenced those peoples.
So tell us about, where does Putin get these ideas? Is he going right back to the beginning? Does he want to sort of create the old Russia? I mean, is that what really he's after?
That's a great question, Scott, because Putin is an avid historian. He loves history. Some people say he embellishes the Russian history a little bit too much from his point of view. But if you look, even, Putin is definitely not what I would call a religious or spiritual guy, but he is one that is loyal, devoutly loyal to the Russian Orthodox Church. Where does that go back to? Well, back in the time of the Byzantine Empire, back to the 8th century, when you had Western Europe was actually shifting toward what we call Rome and the Roman Catholicism. You had, and then the Latin language, you had the Byzantine Empire actually created this synthesis of Greco-Oriental culture. So by the time of the 9th century, we get into the empire, Byzantine Empire, ancient Russia, further expands under the dynasty of many of the Macedonian emperors who were influenced with that particular worldview. And so you get into setting the stage, the philosophical and religious context. Russia, what Russia is made the identity of the Russian people. By the 14th century, Moscow was really centralized as a citadel for Russian Orthodoxy. Some historians refer to Moscow in terms of the Byzantine Empire as the Third Rome. So you have you have the shifting in history going with we call it the Tsars, the rulers in Russia. So as early as 15th century, in 1547, you had the Tsar of Russia, who was known as Ivan the Terrible.
That's a familiar name.
That was, and that really set the stage. I mean, Russians, by nature, they were ruthless rulers. They had zero tolerance, and they were very oppressive. So again, you see back into the DNA, the fabric of the Russians, their culture. Ivan carried out his bloody conquest in the 15th century. What? He had this vision. He wanted to expand Russia. And that was something that had driven many of the early Tsars in Russia. And you get down to even Peter the First, who were actually also known as Peter the Great. He had the same ambitions. And then, by the way, these guys of Peter the Great, they happen to be heroes. They're historical cultural icons. For Putin begins really looking at, he sees himself in this role of continuing the dynasty of imperial Russia. Not so much communism. We'll talk about the communist side of it because, when the Soviet Union fell in 1991, you begin seeing Putin become very critical of the communists. Because why? Because for 75 years, they decimated the economy. They almost destroyed, they bankrupted the nation. So right now, Putin is believing there's going to be this renaissance of a glorious imperial Russia that was seen during that day and time.
So is it true then he wants to sort of recreate the USSR, or is it further back than that? Is it he doesn't really care about the USSR. He wants to go back to the imperial Russia before all that.
Exactly, Scott. And that's a very accurate assessment because, and we'll talk in later segments about we tend to get ourselves stuck in this Cold War era view of Russia, trying to understand Russia and deal with it for foreign policy matters from back in those days when we were dealing with the former Soviet Union. But to understand where Russia is today, in terms, we don't use the term communism or even Soviet Union. It's now Russian Federation. And there's a reason Putin is now moving forward, again, looking back. Because if you look, in the 18th century, which was the golden era of Russian history, it was really the Renaissance period of Russia. Alexander II who is very well revered by Putin and many leaders in the Russian parliament today. They initiated these incredible sweeping reforms, industrial revolution, the railroads expanded. Out of that Russian cultural renaissance period in the 18th century under Alexander II, you then begin seeing it paved the way for the greatest authors and composers, Tolstoy, Tchaikovsky, to mention just a few. And it was truly the height of where Russia, we see this incredible, almost an enlightenment there. But one of the weaknesses that remain was they were stuck into the past, this relic of the Russia's early Tsars.
When Yeshua laid hands on people to heal them, what exactly was he doing? Could it be that he was employing an ancient healing practice long since forgotten? And what if you could do the same thing today to stop a heart attack, bleeding, an allergic reaction, even choking?
But we've had people who were bitten by a poisonous snake, and they did this application, and when they moved their hands, all the poison and the stuff was just sitting at the top of the skin, and they just wipe it off.
How to Heal with Your Bare Hands with Dr. Alfonso Manzo shows us step by step how to use the Hebrew alphabet to correlate touch points on the body that unlock seemingly miraculous healing capabilities. This teaching is not for sale and it's not available anywhere online. Instead, we'd like to give you this teaching as a thank you gift for donating to A Rood Awakening International. When you donate $50 as a love gift in January, you'll get How to Heal with Your Bare Hands with Dr. Alfonso Manzo on DVD, Blu-ray, or streaming on the michaelrood.tv app. Donate $100 and you'll get How to Heal with Your Bare Hands, plus a blue marble glass mezuzah with elegant gold accents and a scripture scroll to put inside. Donate $300 and you'll get How to Heal with Your Bare Hands, the blue marble glass mezuzah, and a natural wood 3-dimensional plaque featuring the menorah, the word shalom in both Hebrew and English, and a message of blessing from A Rood Awakening on the back. These gifts are a limited time offer from Michael Rood to thank you for your support. Make your donation today and receive the $50 gift, the $100 gift, or the $300 gift. Thank you. When you donate to receive the love gift, you ensure that these teachings keep coming from A Rood Awakening International. Use your smartphone to scan the QR code on your screen to donate now and receive these limited time gifts. Or call 888-766-3610. Or get your gifts online with a donation at monthlylovegift.com.
While other nations in Europe were moving forward, Scott, Great Britain and France and Germany, at least establishing some cohesive parliamentary procedures in their government, there was kind of like, I don't know, Russia was kind of in this time warp. Even though it was seeing this great period of renaissance and renewal, they were kind of stuck in time. And one of the problems that this actually set the stage for Russia's downfall in the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917.
Wow. So how did that happen? How did that create their downfall? What was it that led to the Bolshevik Revolution?
The last Tsar, Russian Tsar, Nicholas II, he was so grossly incompetent and out of touch with the Russian people. He was a guy that said, sort of like, let them eat cake, that kind of view. He was so, he had this concept of the aristocracy. And at the time when factory workers, at the time when the military were going through incredible periods of poverty, neglect, there were long hours in the factories, and they were calling out to Nicholas II, say, we need some reforms. We hear about reforms that are going on in Europe. I mean, what chance do we have, actually? Because soldiers were poorly equipped. They were not fed, not properly equipped, And then they were being asked to be sent to the front because World War I coming on the scene, and with Germany. And so the climate itself was one that Nicholas, he had stoppers in his ears and earplugs, and but not willing to listen to the Russian people, the citizens of his time. And what was even worse was his wife was one that was the more vocal one, had actually, there was the very cultic priest that was there that she was involved with getting all kinds of information, false information of what to do, how to guide policy in the day. So it was set up such a disastrous situation. So the climate was ripe for revolution. We began seeing rising factions. There were two groups. There were the Marxists and the Bolsheviks. The Marxists and Bolsheviks were looking for, this is the time where the people, we need actually, because of the oppressed, the classes, we now need liberation. And so after Nicholas, matter of fact, the Bolsheviks revolted in 1917. The Bolshevik Revolution was a bloody revolution. Executed the aristocracy. Nicholas II and his family were all executed. And it just from there, the bloodshed that took place set the stage. You had Lenin that now comes, the power to fulfill the vision of Marx and Engels, because what is it? The Communist Manifesto, the Communist doctrine is this. You use revolution to free the classes of the oppressed, and you eradicate the aristocracy and the middle class, known as the bourgeois state, to liberate what is known as the proletariat. Proletariat are the exploited working class. That's been the dogma. That's been the doctrine of communism. So in the process, what happened in the Bolshevik Revolution, instead of really liberating the people, what happened? Property was confiscated. Churches and synagogues were either shut down or destroyed. Priests and rabbis were executed in the masses. Marxist doctrine, what it does, it begins mandating that the state becomes the new absolute religion. So you got to realize this. Where you had Jewish populations in Russia, and you had devout Greek Orthodox there. Now, the new power brokers on the scene, with the rise of the communism from the Bolshevik Revolution, mandated that now we're going to eradicate, because we want to eradicate religion. The state has become the new religion and the new authority for the people.
So government is your God now.
Absolutely. And you see, people here in the United States, it amazes me why individuals want to favor socialism, Marxism. They use, of course, the name progressive. It's a progressive ideology, but it was all the same thing. It all comes from the same DNA construct there.
Well, even looks like this. It's the same argument. Some people don't have anything. Let's make it so that everybody's equal now, because that's not fair, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You go toward this welfare state, it's redistribution of wealth. Capitalism is evil, it's greedy, and now we need the government to become the sole provider. And you see, during the Bolshevik Revolution, 1917, the people, they were looking for a solution, because they weren't being fed, they'd been betrayed by the aristocracy, so the stage, it was ripe. The climate was ripe for this revolution. And so what often happens is people, they think, okay, I'm going to get all the free stuff in government. And this is the problem. Get all the free stuff. And they wound up what's going to be the cost? What's going to be the price for that? For government providing you everything, I'm going to give up my individual liberties. I'm going to give up my freedoms. That's what our constitutional republic, our founding fathers said, no, that's what we're breaking away from during the Revolutionary War. We want to avoid that at all costs. It's a government for the people. We are the people, the government, and not the government becoming the absolute authority. And that's what happened in Russia. We see it was so devastating.
So when the soldiers weren't being fed and the aristocracy, so what was the structure there? When you said other countries were moving toward a parliament, was Russia still stuck in these sort of we're the kings and you're the serfs? I mean, what kind of structure was that?
Russia now, at this period of time, Scott, especially by the time, I say between 1975, nearly 75 years in Russian history, from 1924 to 1991. After Lenin passes, you now move from this serfdom, medieval serfdom, now moving into full-blown communism. Stalin comes to power, and he sees the opportunity now to implement the machinery of communism, to actually carry out. So he begins in 1924 with what's called the Reign of Terror, known as the Great Purge. Over 30 years, Stalin begins systematically executing, get this, thousands of people, even those who were close associates of his, because he was paranoid that somebody would bump him up, somebody would take him out. So he establishes the Soviet police, known as the KGB. They began monitoring all phone calls and correspondence, 24-hour surveillance on all citizens. Factory workers now, okay, it was even worse, factory workers now become slaves to building the Russian army, the Soviet army. Not only that, but you have collective farms. Farms are now taken over as the property and the instruments of the Russian government, while millions of people were perishing from famine. The collective farms that were being run by Stalin. Why? Because we had to feed now the Red Army. And the Red Army is forced to fight Germany to the death during World War II as Russian citizens perish. So you begin seeing in the famines in Russia and Ukraine, those nations in Eastern Europe began experiencing, because they were now under the iron boot of communism, and it is horribly oppressive. So you begin seeing the Soviet Union ruling Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Belarus, later East Germany, under this most oppressive system. So now it's like moving from medieval serfdom, that to answer your question, now we're like the oppressive totalitarian state on steroids now.
Now, a lot of people see similar things happening here, but sort of a different, maybe you can lend some light to this, is they see that as, here in the US, not necessarily the government taking over all the land, but corporations, people like Bill Gates and things like that. So is there this sort of cooperation between Bill Gates and the government to do this same type of thing? You see that here?
I would say also, Scott, that what you bring up with Bill Gates, because when you mention Bill Gates, he's what I call, he's part of this globalist cabal that has the idea of you taking control.
Hey, Torah fans, I just want to take a minute on behalf of everyone here at A Rood Awakening to say thank you. Because without you, nothing happens. No Shabbat Night Live, no michaelrood.tv app, no social media updates, no new videos on YouTube or Rumble. Without you, no one would see anything from Michael Rood or any of the other guest teachers we have on our programs. There's no corporate safety net with a pile of money in case there's not enough. There's no government grant that keeps things going. And we don't ask companies outside this ministry to pay for commercials. In fact, some have offered and we have declined because that's not the way Yeshua did it. Yeshua's ministry needed donations from his followers. Several times in the Gospels, we see that Yeshua asked the disciples to buy something. Without money, how would they do that? They all left their jobs to follow him. And not to mention, the disciples even had Judas to keep track of the money. We don't like asking you to donate. That's uncomfortable for anyone, but we do want to thank you for doing it. You are the reason for every Rood awakening. Thank you.
When I use the term globalism, I'm talking about government on steroids. You know, our founding fathers of this constitutional republic always wanted lesser government, less government, and not more government. When you begin empowering government, making government bigger, as certain individuals here in the United States, they want to give all power to government, and that is a bad move. Well, when you talk about globalism and these individuals like Bill Gates that actually, they're players because they play out certain scenarios, events that happen, whether we go back, and I discussed this in length in my research on the Wuhan lab with the COVID pandemic, which I call a plandemic. Why? Because the idea is to create some crisis there by which you empower government all the more. World Health Organization, United Nations.
Because they have the solution suddenly.
They have the solution, that's it. We're from here, from the government. We're the help. And, so
Isn't that what Reagan said? That those are the most frightening words? Or who said that? Some president, that we're from the government and we're here to help.
Yes. I don't know. I think that was under the Clinton administration. But anyhow, you see this whole thing being played out. History repeats itself. We need to learn the lessons of history. We need to look at Russia, communist Russia, and the horrible oppression that was taking place there. And we're Russia. There was a little bit of signs of hope because after Stalin died there, 1953, Khrushchev, he's a Red Army officer, he was loyal to Stalin, but he hated Stalin. Why? Because Stalin was he was executing everybody that he was paranoid of. And he was so tired of this great purge. So Khrushchev comes to power. He immediately he surprises everybody by condemning the great purge of mass executions that were carried out by Stalin. And as an act of amnesty, he even he releases millions of political prisoners. Why? Because Stalin had imprisoned thousands and thousands and thousands, anybody with any suspicion at all, okay, you're going to go to the gulags. We're sending you to Siberia. So he said, I'm putting a stop to that. Now, did Russia get born again overnight when Khrushchev? No means at all. Russia experienced some slight relief from Stalin's reign of terror, but the Soviets in 1950s were still a relentless force of communism to be reckoned at. You had basically under continuing down, but you would see almost, I call it a thawing out of the Cold War era. And we begin seeing Russia now moving into, because certain things are going on. First of all, the communists have bankrupted the economy. Things are not going as well as they would hope to portray. So by the time that the Berlin Wall, up to that time, and shortly after the Cuban Missile Crisis, there still remain a hostile Cold War adversary. But Brezhnev later comes on the scene after Khrushchev. And there's a period he develops. Brezhnev is more open. He was talking to Richard Nixon of taking a détente approach. Détente is a word, Russian word, actually means a relaxing of policy. You're easing up a little bit. So at that time, the concern was because a nuclear superpower, the Nixon administration and other administrations that followed was, hey, is there a way we can do unilateral disarmament treaties? We'll get rid of some of our nuke stockpile. You get rid of yours. So under the Nixon administration, Brezhnev works to do the strategic arms limitations known as the SALT talks 1 and 2, and efforts to limit the nuclear arms race, because you got to back in these days, leading up to the 1980s, 1990s, individuals were more concerned about Russia being a nuclear power, having the ability at any given moment that they could use that nuclear card. So when we look at the sum total of that picture, with the decline of the Soviet Union that we're going to be discussing about, it is there we begin seeing this shift of Russia into the demise of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is going to collapse in 1991. And so now we have to begin looking at the big picture. See, sometimes in terms of foreign policy, Scott, one of the problems is that we get stuck. We get stuck in Cold War doctrine, Cold War policy, and we have to look at the current situation, how we're going to move ahead.
So how does this play into what we now see on the world stage as the New World Order, Agenda 2030, never mind Agenda 2025, that's nothing, look at Agenda 2030. How does Russia play into all of that with the New World Order kind of rising?
What is interesting is this. Putin, for the most part, has distanced himself. He's been critical of New World Order. Now, he's still there as a player on this stage, but at the same time, what is accelerating right now, you mentioned the United Nations, and they recently had they affirmed their 75th anniversary there with their global accords, everything from the climate change doctrines, the Paris Accords, reaffirming that. But the United Nations basically is looked as, they see Russia over here as a significant impact on a global scene. But they haven't played well in the sandbox, okay? So they're a force to be reckoned with. So what we have to do in terms of globalism, the construct of globalism, is how can we align nations, including Russia, how can we get them aligned in order to achieve 2030 sustainability goals that make them greener, more environmentally friendly, and not only that, but to give the World Health Organization and other agencies more powers to create these vaccine passports and those things. So it's kind of this interesting dichotomy that's going on, this relationship that's going on. Russia and Putin are very skeptical and distrusting of United Nations. What is going on in we call it the World Economic Forum, even though Putin has attended meetings there with Klaus Schwab, they've remained silent, and Russia is going to turn into be Russia. So the question is this: what tools or instruments are going to be used on the table to get Russia to comply with the New World Order? So, and people tend to think, well, okay, Russia's the big bad guy in this scenario. The black and white pictures are not easily defined here. If the New World Order uses certain tools on the table, if maybe through influence of foreign policy, influence the United States foreign policy, they take certain actions, they really wouldn't mind a World War III. Matter of fact, they look at world crisis. Again, why? Because we're coming from this totalitarian, even back for the pandemic, create this catastrophic crisis in order to emerge this greater opportunities for government control. What better way to do that than to have a World War III in your hands? I mean, this is the thing that we have to begin thinking about, because the globalists are not so much concerned about human life. Matter of fact, they look at that the humans are a threat to the environment, and more that we can advocate zero population growth, even to do what can do to remove the carbon footprint. And maybe a good World War III would decimate some of those populations. This sounds like crazy stuff. I have a friend of mine that's a geopolitical expert, written a number of books, Augusto Zimmerman in Australia, and has actually gone through the scenarios with the United Nations and all the globalist goals there, and saying, how could a global catastrophe like a world war be used to further their agenda?
And that agenda was recently seen in the U.S. here. I mean, just people forget about it, but the Georgia Guidestones had all of those, all those goals on there, and mysteriously somehow got blown up and destroyed. That's all gone now.
Yes, one only has to go into the website. This is not conspiracy stuff. You go to the website. Look at United Nations Global Sustainability Goals, everything from diversity, equity, inclusion mandates, to LGBTQ agendas, to this greening of the environment, to the point where we're all going to drive electric cars. Okay, where is that going to go? Eliminate this carbon footprint. They envision creating what's called these 15-minute communities. 15-minute cities. They've actually done models of it. We're here in the United States. Nobody drives a car. You live within, the government builds these nice condos, these apartments for you. Well, we've seen what that looked like in the Soviet Union. They tore down everybody's houses and built all these apartments. So everybody's within walking distance, or you can catch the train or what have you, or the metro to your work area. All shop in one neighborhood, one happy village. Oh, and by the way, to do so, you're not going to own anything, but you're going to be completely happy.
So says Klaus. Yeah.
That's their mantra.
Yeah. Wow. What are we going to get into next week?
What we're going to look at is now because now we're having to deal with the demise. Russia, the Soviet Union is about to go down. And so where are we in terms of Russia now and moving into with Putin coming into leadership? We're going to look at the Russian Federation, where they are now, and how that's impacting geopolitical events today.
All right, Mark, thank you for being here. You're enlightening me. I don't know a lot about this, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers don't either. Some really do, but I don't. So I'm really fascinated in this. So thank you for being here. Thank you for entertaining questions about this, because I think this is really important to know, especially for our country, with what Russia is doing.
Yes, thank you, Scott, for having me on your program. I appreciate it.
Certainly. So we got a couple more weeks to do this, so why don't you join us as well? Thank you for joining us for Shabbat Night Live. More with Mark Fulmer next week. Until then, Shavua Tov. Have a great week. Shabbat Shalom.
Whenever and wherever you are watching this broadcast, it represents hundreds of man-hours of production and post-production, and then it goes out to the world in several different languages. Why is this possible? It's because people like you support this ministry. We do our best to get this out freely to the entire world. Freely you have received. Now, this is your opportunity to do as Yeshua said, and freely give. Shalom, Torah fans. Give this video a thumbs up and share it with a friend. Tap the subscription button and the bell icon, and I promise to update weekly with in-depth biblical research. Be sure to download the new michaelrood.tv app for both mobile and home devices for even more commercial-free content.